In this video, we're going to explore another type of navigation called tab navigation. Here's an example of how it's going to look when our app is completed. On the Now Playing tab, we'll be able to browse the Now Playing movies. And on the Top Rated tab, we'll have the top rated movies loaded. The only difference between Now Playing and Top Rated is that we're targeting a different endpoint when making our network call to our API. If we go to the movie database API docs, which is referenced in the course portal, we can scroll down here and select movies. And then that gives us all the available endpoints. We can see we have latest, now playing, popular, top rated, and upcoming. The previous iteration of our app has only referenced the now playing endpoint. If we hit get, we can see the URL for that endpoint. And we can see the now playing on the end of the URL. Well, we want to add the ability to hit the top rated endpoint. If I hit get here, I can see the top rated added on to the URL. If you'll notice, this part of the URL is exactly the same for both of them. So to get both, we'll just need to switch this part of the URL to get whatever endpoint we're after. Let's go back into our Movies View controller and set up a property to store that endpoint. I'm going to go up here to the top where I create my variables that I want to be able to see throughout my class file. We can say var endpoint, and it's going to be of type string. Let's go down to our actual network request and plug that in. So instead of now playing, we'll plug in our endpoint. Remember, you can insert a variable or constant within a string by using the backslash and then putting your variable or constant within parentheses. We did the same thing for our API key right here. Now, since this endpoint string is really the only difference between the two tabs, it would be silly to create a whole nother view controller and then set it up with another table view just to access that other endpoint. So what we can do instead is programmatically make each tab. And we'll use the same view controller for each tab, but we'll swap in the proper endpoint. So where do we need to put the code to programmatically create a tab bar controller? Well, since the tab bar controller is going to be the first thing in our app, we need to go to the very first point that our app begins, and that's in the app delegate. We can reference the did finish launching with options in our app delegate to get inside the method that's first called when our app first stretches its arms and is awake. So since we're adding our tab bar controller programmatically, we'll need to first reference our window. The variable for window has already been set up here, so we can just say window equals UI window. And we'll need to give it a frame. And we'll reference the main screen and get the bounds of that screen. The storyboard is like a blueprint for how to build your app. So first, let's reference that storyboard so we can reference the individual pieces in that storyboard. We'll say let storyboard equal UI storyboard, and we'll use the name and bundle. Now the name is just the name of the storyboard. The default storyboard came named main. And if you go over here, you can see that it's called main. For init_bundle, we'll put nil. What we want to do now is create the navigation controller and view controller that will live on our Now Playing tab. So we'll start by referencing the navigation controller. The cool thing about this is the navigation controller knows every view controller that it's tied to through segues. So if you can get the navigation controller, it's really easy to get all the view controllers in its stack. We'll call this the Now Playing navigation controller. Now we'll make this navigation controller by referencing the blueprints on the storyboard from the navigation controller that's there. We can say storyboard and then run this method instantiate view controller with identifier. This identifier is a string that we need to set. Let's head back to the storyboard for a second. I'm going to click on this navigation controller here, and over here click on the identity inspector and go down and give it a storyboard ID. That's the ID that's referenced in the instantiate view controller. We'll just call it movies navigation controller. Okay, let's head back to the app delegate and we'll type in movies navigation controller for that identifier. Now notice this method says instantiate view controller with identifier. And if I hold option get this question mark and click on the now plain navigation controller, it's actually saying of type UI view controller, but we want it to be a navigation controller. So let's go ahead and cast that as a UI navigation controller. All right, so now we've basically built a now plain navigation controller by referencing the blueprints on the storyboard for the navigation controller, Movies navigation controller. Now let's get at the view controller that it's hooked to, the Movies view controller. But we're just going to use the Movies view controller as a blueprint to make our now plain view controller. We can go to the now plain navigation controller and reference the property .top view controller. The top view controller is the first view controller that the navigation controller is hooked to. Now, since we want to access the particular property endpoint inside the Movies view controller, we're going to need to cast this as Movies view controller. That way we'll actually be able to set the property. So now if I reference our newly made now plain view controller, I should have access to endpoint, which I do. And I can set that to now plain. I'll use this exact same approach to create a top-rated view controller and navigation controller. I can actually just copy what we have here, paste, and then modify. So now this isn't going to be the now plain navigation controller. It's going to be the top-rated navigation controller. This will no longer be the now plain view controller. It will be the top-rated view controller. And it will be referencing the top-rated navigation controller. And now we can set the endpoint of the top-rated view controller to now plain. The next step is creating a tab bar programmatically and then setting which tab has which view controller. To create the tab bar controller, I can say let tab bar controller equal UI tab bar controller. And I'll use these open and close parentheses here to initialize and create that tab bar controller. Now, I'll reference the tab bar controller and then use .view controllers and pass in an array containing the view controllers which I want tabs for. In this case, I'm going to want to link each navigation controller because that's where the now plain story really starts. Now plain navigation controller, top-rated navigation controller. The next thing we need to do is programmatically set the initial view controller. Programmatically, this is known as the root view controller, and we'll set it in the window. Window.rootViewController equals tab bar controller. And just to make sure the window's all set up, we'll run window.makeKeyAndVisible. Let's go ahead and run our app and see what it looks like. Now I don't see anything down here that looks like a tab bar controller, but if I click over here, I can see it does load, but it looks like the same stuff. Let's see what the issue is. Okay, well here's one problem. We've set the endpoint to now plain and now plain, which is the same. We should set this to top rated. Now we can switch back and forth, but our tab bar looks a little bland. Let's look at some of the ways we can set that up and customize it. Now we'll set up the tab bar on the first view controller that is hooked to that tab, which in this case is actually the navigation controller. So that's where we'll set it. Under the now plain navigation controller, where we set that up, we can say now plain navigation controller dot tab bar item dot title equals now plain. And we'll do the same for our top rated navigation controller dot tab bar item dot title equals top rated. All right, now we at least have the titles here. That's pretty cool, but it would be nice if we had a little icon. I'm going to bring in some icons that I got from the Noun project by going over here to my assets folder, and then I'll navigate to my images in Finder. I'll drag in the now plain and the top rated. Back in the app del where I set up the title, I can say now plain navigation controller dot tab bar item dot image equals UI image named, and then here I can put in the string of the name of the image, which is now plain. I'll do the same thing for the top rated navigation controller dot tab bar item dot image equals UI image And we'll pass the string name, which is top rated. Okay, I see I have the one icon here. I think I misspelled it. Yep. Let's run that again. All right, now I have both my icons. Let's do a quick recap of everything we did. Think of the storyboard as the blueprint for things that could be. We had a navigation controller that we made connected to our movies view controller and a detail view controller. We then went to the app delegate because this method did finish launching with options is the very first method that's called when our app awakens. We were able to reference the window, so we could do some things like setting the root view controller here later. And then we got access to the storyboard so we could get at our blueprints. We then ran a method on our storyboard called Instantiate View Controller with Identifier and passed that the Movies Navigation Controller, which was an ID that we set by clicking on our navigation controller and heading to the Identity Inspector and then setting the storyboard ID. After that, we could get at the first view controller in the stack by using this now playing navigation controller .top view controller. We had to cast this as specifically movies view controller to enable us to get to that property that we had in the movies view controller. That was endpoint. In this line, we set that endpoint to now playing. We did the exact same thing in the top rated navigation controller and went on to set the endpoint as top rated. We created a custom tab bar here, and then we set the two view controllers in this array. Down here, we made the tab view controller our root view controller, which is the same as initial view controller. To further customize our tab bar, we added a title using tabbar_item.title and tabbar_item.image to reference an image that we added. Remember, we added those to the navigation controller because that was the first view controller that the tab bar was hooked to. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll take your app to the next level.